Biodiversity, or biological diversity, is the variety of all living things. When we talk about biodiversity, the average person is probably exposed to it through TV and social media. So they're thinking about coral reefs or panda bears or tropical rainforests. And those are all amazing places and have value, but I think it's so exciting to learn about the biodiversity right here where we live. The Hudson Valley is really special, and we have a whole diversity of geology types and landforms that create a mosaic of different kinds of habitats. We have everything from forests and streams to grasslands. We have rocky cliffs and caves. We have all different kinds of wetlands. And in the Hudson River estuary itself, we have 150 miles of riverine habitats, everything from salty and brackish to freshwater, including our globally rare freshwater tidal wetlands. And we have a whole array of different kinds of fish species and other wildlife that use the river, like migratory birds. It's alarming that we're in this biodiversity crisis and this climate crisis right now, and we know that there's species extinction, species declines globally. Protecting what we have helps ecological communities be more resilient. You know, not to mention, for me, the stress of those kinds of concerns makes me want to be in nature even more. The Hudson River Estuary Program and Cornell University developed a map of 23 significant biodiversity areas for the Hudson Valley. And this was a vision for protecting the most important places. So we're gonna go visit some of those areas and talk to people who know them well and who are involved in protecting them for the future.
Biodiversity, the word simply refers to all of the variation in the biological world. It is responsible for the magnificent beauty of our landscapes. It is responsible for creating the fertility in our soils, for pollination, for putting oxygen into the air for us and wildlife to breathe. I think of it as something that is mainly responsible for making the world habitable. I have been studying the habitats of the Hudson Valley for 33 years. And, you know, as a biologist, keeping my eyes open is it's been my work. Wetlands are something that everyone is familiar with, but people might be unaware of the many different kinds of wetlands. Swamps, wet meadows, marshes, fens, bogs. Thompson Pond is what we call a circumneutral bog lake. This is a rare habitat in the region. They're especially in areas of limestone bedrock. They have water chemistry in the vicinity of a neutral pH. I love being in wetlands like this one because it's kind of like a treasure hunt. These are places where you're likely to see plants and animals that you just don't see in other places. This can be very important nesting habitat for waterfowl, of course. They like protected areas. River otters love circumneutral bog lakes. I've never been to a circumneutral bog lake where I did not see sign of a river otter. These habitats usually have lots of submerged aquatic vegetation, and some of these are really interesting plants. Ah, this is great. This is a bladderwort. There are many species of bladderworts. And what you see is all those little sacs, those little pinkish sacs. Those actually suck in tiny invertebrates in the water. Tiny invertebrates.
What?
These are you
Like
thought they
keeping
were
them
for
more like buoyant.
No, these are not air-filled, or that's not their purpose. This is how the plant ingests its food. These pink bladders are empty, and I'll show you some that are already full of invertebrates. Here, these black bladders. You know,
Wow.
probably nearly microscopic invertebrates.
Yeah, wow.
And this is one of the ways that this plant deals with the low availability of nutrients in a wetland like this that has circumneutral water. I think of forests actually as the protectors of wetlands and streams. The native species here have been interacting in this environment, in most cases, for thousands of years. And they are well integrated with all of the other parts of these ecosystems. We take one part of that away, and you and I can't predict what's going to happen. We need to assume it is serving an important role out there. Whether or not we have discovered that role, that is our problem.
So you can still see all our little maple seedlings from the mast year.
Yep. Goldfinch calling.
Biodiversity is about interconnectedness and thinking about how everything is related to one another. So this property is part of a larger complex that we're conserving as an organization, as sort of a connecting piece between several other properties. We conserve land for different reasons. Sometimes our purposes are more for recreation and to make sure that people can get out on the land. And other times it's really more about creating a refuge for our biodiversity.
This area is one of the prime places for microclimates and microhabitats. We're almost touching the Hudson River, which is at sea level, and then we go up to some really high ridges in the Marlborough Mountains. And all of those different little pockets of difference across the landscape lead to different plants growing there, different fungi growing there, and that in turn leads to different animals occurring there. Woodpecker?
Yeah.
Yep.
Some of our skunk cabbages coming up. I have a
Yeah, I
soft
think
spot for them.
They're such a lush, full-bodied plant. It's almost like something you'd see in a tropical rainforest.
Yeah.
But they're here in the Hudson Valley.
And then one of my favorite ephemerals, Jack in the Pulpit. Here in the Hudson Valley, there's a lot of fragmentations. One of our goals on a larger scale is to create connectivity across the landscape.
Habitat connectivity refers to the idea of when wildlife can move from one place to another, whether it's for breeding or shelter, food and water.
Thinking about connectivity, the northern cricket frog is a great flagship species because they have really specific but diverse needs throughout the course of a year. They like to breed in wetlands, and they lay their eggs in these lakes and ponds. But once they're done breeding, they head off into the woods, and you can find them almost anywhere. There are only a few populations left in New York State, so this area is just absolutely critical for protecting them.
Humans are one of the biggest determinants for what happens to biodiversity. Our actions have the most impact on every other species. There's a lot of different ways to manage land. Some of that is just passive, to just conserve it. And then there's also a lot of great organizations and people throughout the community who are really trying to think about how we can participate in making sure that we move into a resilient future. Some of those things look like thinking about our threats that have increased over the years. For example, the presence of invasive species, which displace and compete with our native species, pests and pathogens that are spreading. Hemlock looks maybe like it's got Woolly-adelgid.
Yeah.
One really important factor that we're thinking about a lot in our work is deer overabundance. This has happened for a number of reasons, including that the natural predators to deer, which usually keep population sizes down, have been extirpated from their home. So we have many hungry deer, and those deer searching for food sources are eating a lot of our young native trees. So we have all of these adolescent to middle-aged trees and nothing really coming up underneath. So it really puts us in a precarious situation for our future forests.
One of the things we love about our forests in autumn are all the different colors, and that's a result of all the different tree species diversity. So that's an example of species diversity. As we know, a lot of our tree species in the forest are threatened by different diseases and pathogens. There's examples like hemlock woolly-adelgid or emerald ash borer. We also rely on genetic diversity within a species because if we have some ash trees, for example, that can survive emerald ash borer, they will go on to help carry on that population. And then ecosystem diversity refers to when we have just a whole complex of different habitats, different interactions between the species that live there, and it's really what makes our landscapes in the Hudson Valley so diverse, so scenic, and so special for wildlife and plants.
The idea of preserving genetic diversity and biodiversity in general is to keep the living system as resilient as possible for all sorts of insults that might happen in the future that we can't even imagine right now. To really tell the story, you need to start with geology. Geology is the paper on which the biological story is actually written. In terms of Rosendale, the story here is limestone mining. So back in the 1800s, this was the principal source for cement in the entire North America. They left large cavernous areas with openings that are up at the surface. And that is actually the perfect formula for creating a bat hibernation site.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people who come to Rosendale don't even realize all of this is happening underground.
Yeah, it's fairly well hidden.
Yeah, so this is the kind of conditions you said that the bats really want for hibernation, temperature-wise.
Temperature stability is the main thing. But the other thing they like is for it to not be too dry. So all the dripping that you're hearing around here, that's very typical of what you'll find, and that's also perfect for the bats. And then the disease known as white nose syndrome arrived. The fungal disease infects their skin, but it doesn't do a tremendous amount of tissue damage, and that's not what was killing the bats. It turned out it was waking the bats up while they were supposed to be hibernating too often. and cause them to burn through their fat reserves that they need to live throughout the winter. In neighboring states to the south, they lost 99% of their little brown bats. And so this became our mission, was to try to figure out what it was that was keeping these bats alive. So then we did a bunch of genetic tests, and we in fact showed that the bats that are left surviving are genetically different from the bats that died. And so this is essentially an example of evolution occurring, right before our very eyes. All of New York's bats are strongly oriented around forest habitats. They're all exclusively eating flying insects, sometimes to the point where literally eating half of their body weight in a single night of insects. A little brown bat just hanging on the ceiling is probably the size of your thumb. That crevice right up there, it's about 12 feet long. Mm-hmm. You could fit 1,000 bats in that spot.
Wow.
What I say about bats is you just have to accept them the way they are. They're never going to look cuddly. You can't make a pet out of a bat. They are what they are. And it's a unique role that they play on this web of life that we rely on so heavily. And we can't afford to be throwing away pieces of something so complicated that we don't even understand it. The risk is just too great.
The Hudson River estuary is really unique. One thing that's really special is we're freshwater tidal. It's a globally rare type of ecosystem. Our tidal regime has about a 3 to 5 foot range to it. Even this far north where we are here at Stockport Flats, we'll see about the same tidal range that you'll see down in New York Harbor. In that we have 150 miles of that is amazing. So there's many different types of tidal wetlands. A lot of them are underwater that you might not see. They provide a nursery for fish, a place to shelter them, a place for them to feed and forage. Most coastal areas where you have that much of a tidal range, you're going to have more of an ocean influence, and you'll see a lot more saltwater-based species. Here, those species that are adapted to having both a tidal range and entirely fresh water are very unique. These are some stalks of water chestnut laying in the mud. And then these are the lower intertidal plants, the spatterdock. They can be happy, like you can see right now, totally out of the water. Mm-hmm. But then you can tell all of those plants are completely mud covered. So this is an area that would be underwater at high tide. And you can see the height of the mud line on the next elevation plant behind that. That's some cattail. Beautiful example of the native cattail right there. And these plants are all adapted to living at those different levels.
Yeah. And it's wild to think if we were paddling during high tide, we would only think the cattails were maybe about 4 feet tall, when actually they're almost double that.
Exactly. But how thick that cattail will grow together, you can really see how nesting birds can really use this as an important breeding bird area. You get great protection in there, lots of shelter. We see a lot of night herons. Marsh wrens will nest in the emergent marshes. There's a bald eagle hanging out right behind my shoulder here. And the eagle population had been cut back to almost nothing. But really with a lot of preservation, we've seen a really dramatic comeback to the point where almost every time I visit Stockport Flats here, I can count on seeing at least 1 or 2 bald eagles flying. a beautiful comeback story we have in the Hudson River Valley.
The Shawangum Grasslands National Wildlife Refuge. It's been recognized as an important bird area by Audubon. Having large, expansive grasslands is somewhat unique in the Northeast. It's more typical of the Midwest of the United States. And there are species of grassland breeding birds that will only breed in grasslands that are of a certain size. And I mean, we're talking like 100 acres or more. And so there are 400 acres of grassland here. And so that really can support a diversity of species like grasshopper sparrow, meadowlarks. And in the winter, there's raptors that come and actually spend the winter here, like short-eared owl and northern harrier. One of my favorite birds is the woodcock. And they're a really fun bird that looks like a shorebird, has a long bill, and while they live in the forest, they use open grasslands to do these amazing courtship displays where they go up in the air and then they come flying down. And the first time I came to the grasslands was actually in late winter, early spring to watch this amazing dance of the male woodcocks.
Here on the Rensselaer Plateau, the high elevations and acidic soils and poor drainage create a natural environment more similar to the northern forests. And it also is the 5th largest intact forest in New York State. Plateau is important for biodiversity because it provides a corridor, helps create that connectivity. We have moose here on the plateau, goshawks and black-throated green warblers and black bears. I was here with a group of people and we're looking at animal tracks and we saw one and it's like, is that a coyote? It's like, no, it was a bobcat. And I knew enough to get down on my hands and knees and take a little sniff. And sure enough, the bobcat had scent marked that stump. So everybody came along and took a sniff of the stump to see where the bobcat had scent marked. People are here all the time enjoying it. They really love the recreational opportunities. And through that, I think, developed value for conserving the forests. They know the inherent value of forests for clean water and clean air and for climate change. You may have noticed on the drive up here that the temperature dropped about 10 degrees from the city of Troy up to the plateau. So the higher elevation and the fact that we have all these intact forests makes the plateau cooler than the surrounding areas. Also, the forests are sequestering carbon. Keeping forests from being converted to non-forest uses is a huge part of what we need to do for climate change. A lot of the forests here on the plateau are what we call working forests. So they are growing trees to support the forest products industry. And that's part of our economy. A landowner who loves their property can work with a forester, harvesting timber sustainably to keep the forest healthy and also help them pay the expenses they have and to continue to own the property that they love.
The cardinal flower blooming in there was pretty lovely.
This is my passion. I love this work. I love every land conservation project that I do. So in the next 20 years, what I would love to see is the puzzle pieces connected from the southern end of the plateau all the way up through to the northern end and really create that full connectivity of conserved land.
My parents are from the Dominican Republic. They moved here. My siblings and I were born here. There is this narrative that land communities are not connected to the land. But after having conversations with my parents, I realized that we're actually really connected to the land. My grandparents were farmers. My parents were selling produce in the streets of what they grew. And it's amazing how in just one generation that can be lost. Here in the Hudson Valley, we're surrounded by green spaces, but as our populations become more urban, more and more people are actually growing up just in apartments, not close to open spaces, green spaces. This is the Sanctuary Healing Garden at Crystal Lake. It is a community-led garden, a place for us to come and learn about the importance of flowers and plants in biodiversity, but also a place for our community to come together and celebrate. In New York City, I grew up just playing on the block, but I had a really amazing experience in the New York Hall of Science. It gave me a scholarship to go to a DEC summer camp, and that completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I co-founded Outdoor Promise, a nonprofit that is focused on equitable access to the outdoors and getting people connected to nature. So this is the highlight.
Wow.
Top of Snake Hill.
The view of the Hudson Highlands is amazing.
Ta-da! We're at the top of Snake Hill, overlooking Dennings Point, Bannerman Castle, the Hudson Highlands, and eventually the Passaic Creek, which kind of winds through the city. Most people drive over the Passaic Creek and have no idea they're driving over a historic, beautiful, natural asset. You wouldn't know it because there's not many access points, and hopefully it will become a greenway and a trail and a biking path in the future. And then there's Storm King Mountain, which is like where the modern environmental movement started with the fight to protect it.
So when you bring groups on hikes up here, what are their reactions to this view?
I mean, most people are in awe. They can't believe that this view is here. We've partnered with local organizations to invite people on free monthly hikes, and that way they find out about what we're protecting. I feel like you can't protect what you don't know, so asking people to save the earth when they haven't really experienced its beauty and its bounty. And this is why I do what I do, because just seeing people's faces, and it's just amazing to see this intergenerational community building. We're dealing with pollutants from our water, our soil, brownfields, PFAS, high asthma rates. So I think in a community like Newburgh, where we have more empty tree pits that have been covered up with cement than actual trees, and high asthma rates, and high heat, we need to connect more people to these places for our health and well-being.
Say Hudson River.
Hudson River. The Conservation Advisory Council recently got a grant to conduct a natural resource inventory of the city of Newburgh. We're excited to catalog all the natural resources that we have, and we want the community involved to share of like what resources they think are important to protect.
I think a lot of times our local government doesn't represent how diverse our communities are, but to be involved in that decision-making process, to have a seat at the table, it often gets inspired by experiences like coming up here.
Yeah, it's kind of like a process of healing, of nature coming back. And it is resilient, just like our people.
And along with people needing a place to live, you know, all these plants and animals need a place to live, and if we can find a way to develop our landscapes in a way that balances those two, we can hopefully have both.
And that the plants and animals are necessary for us to live.
Exactly, right. You know, biodiversity is complex. Everything is interconnected, and nothing in the natural world exists in isolation, including people. We are part of the ecosystem, and that connection we have to nature is really important, especially today. For people, nature is a source of calm and serenity. It's really good for our physical health, it's good for our mental health. As somebody who's lived and worked in the Hudson Valley for decades, I think we're so lucky to have this amazing place. And if we all can do our part, we can make sure that the amazing plants and animals and habitats that are here today are supporting biodiversity well into the future.